At Christmas, I was stitching a man's chest back together in the ER when my phone lit up with a message from my 16-year-old daughter. They said there's no room for me at the table. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. While I was saving a stranger's life, my parents and sister turned her away from our family dinner, sent her driving 40 miles home alone through a snowstorm. When I came home after midnight, her boots were by the door, her bag still zipped, and she was curled up on the couch, too tired to cry. One slice of cold bread and half an orange on a napkin, that was her Christmas dinner. I didn't yell. I didn't beg for understanding. I just stood there and made a decision that would change everything. I didn't make a scene. I took action. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe to our channel so we can keep telling the stories that remind us what love, loss, and courage really look like. My name is Orion Vale, and this is how I learned that silence can hurt more than any betrayal until the day I finally broke it. It was 11:48 p.m. on Christmas Eve when I walked out of Boulder Memorial Hospital, the air sharp and sterile even outside. My hands still smelled like disinfectant. I had just finished performing CPR on a man who swore he was fine until his heart stopped. The kind of case that clings to you even after you clock out. Snow fell in soft waves under the orange glow of the parking lot lights, and all I could think about was getting home, seeing my daughter, and maybe sitting still for 5 minutes. When I opened the door to our apartment in East Boulder, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. No music, no movement, just the faint hum of the heater. Then I saw her boots by the door, her overnight bag still zipped. Lennon, my 16-year-old. She was supposed to be in Aspen Creek spending the night at my parents' house like she did every Christmas Eve. She'd been so proud to drive herself there for the first time, license still warm in her wallet. I found her curled up on the couch, still wearing her coat, her knees pulled to her chest like she was bracing against the cold. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes opened the second I whispered her name. "Hey, sweetheart." "What happened? Why are you here?" Her shoulders tensed. "They said there wasn't any room," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. I blinked. "Room where?" "At the table," she said, choking halfway through the words, trying to hide it with a shrug that didn't work. "Grandma said she didn't expect me, that they already had too many people. She said she couldn't pull up another chair at the last minute." My brain stalled. "Did you get there late?" "No, I was early," she said quickly. "I brought cookies. I even wore the sweater Grandma said she liked." She laughed, once thin and bitter. "They said there were 28 people inside already." Aunt Sienna's daughter was sitting in my usual spot. Everyone was laughing. Grandma said, "It's too crowded this year." Aunt Sienna just nodded. I couldn't find words. Lennon looked down at her hands. I didn't want to make her mad, so I left. I wasn't that hungry anyway. When I turned toward the counter, I saw what she meant by not that hungry, one slice of cold bread slightly bent on a napkin beside half an orange. That was her Christmas dinner. Something cracked inside me, not anger, not yet. More like glass splintering in slow motion. "They didn't offer to drive you home." She shook her head. I didn't want to bother them. She was trying to be brave, holding herself together with politeness. I sat beside her, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me without hesitation, the way you do when you've been holding your breath too long. "I know they don't like you," she whispered. "But I thought that was just between you and them. I didn't think it was about me." I didn't say anything. I just held her tighter. Later, when she finally fell asleep, I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the bag she'd packed so carefully. The extra sweater she'd chosen, the tin of cookies she'd baked herself, still sealed with a red ribbon. I opened the fridge empty except for milk, mustard, and a bottle of water. We hadn't planned a backup Christmas. Why would we? We trusted them. That was what broke me, not the bread or the silence or even the empty house, but the image of them looking into my daughter's eyes and deciding she didn't belong. I stood there for a long time. Then I went to my desk, pulled open the drawer, and took out the thick folder of mortgage statements and house deeds, the property in Aspen Creek, the one I bought 7 years ago. The house my parents lived in, rent-free. The house in my name. I slid the papers into a white envelope. My pulse was calm now. Not trembling, not angry. Just clear. I won't argue, I whispered to no one. I'll act. I placed the envelope on the counter next to the cold bread and the half-orange. Tomorrow, I said quietly, they'll read it. The next morning came gray and thin sunlight spilling through snow clouds. Lennon was still asleep when I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee staring at the folder I'd pulled out the night before. It wasn't the first time I'd opened it, but it was the first time I really looked at what it represented, not money, but control. And history. Growing up in Aspen Creek meant living by unwritten rules. The Vale House wasn't just 4 walls, it was a stage, and my mother Marjorie ran it like a director who never took off her headset. She owned a small antique shop downtown and believed that appearances were everything. My father Richard taught high school history and thought curiosity was dangerous when it went beyond textbooks. When I was 8, I asked for a microscope for Christmas. My mother laughed, called it a toy for kids who like to dissect things. My father said smart people make others uncomfortable, Orion. Don't make that your habit. At the Vale dinner table, curiosity was a sin and silence was safety. I learned to be quiet. Until I didn't. When I decided to go to medical school, my mother said, a doctor, fixing strangers while your own family falls apart. My sister Sienna, meanwhile, dropped out of college to start an event planning business. Every failure of hers became a charming anecdote. Every success of mine was a threat. They loved her for being loud, for keeping the family fun. I was the serious one. When I married, no one showed up because Sienna had an event. When my wife died of a heart complication 5 years later, they said it was the price of your choices. So I stopped expecting comfort. I sent money instead. When my parents started aging faster than their savings, I stepped in. I bought them a small 2-bedroom home in Aspen Creek under my name. Paid their mortgage, covered their utilities, handled their health insurance. 7 years of bills and quiet loyalty. Every Christmas they hosted dinner in that house. I used to think it was the least I could give them. But over the years I noticed the numbers on the utility statements kept climbing spikes every time Sienna had a new client. I didn't connect it at first. Not until I saw her company logo printed on a shipment receipt delivered to their address. My parents' house, the one I paid for, had become her storage space and prep kitchen. My account was footing the bill. I didn't say anything then. Maybe I was afraid of what silence had already turned me into. 2 weeks before that Christmas, I found something worse, an old email chain between my mother and an aunt dated years back. She'd written, Orion's always been unstable, too emotional for a man. We love him, but he doesn't handle life well. That line hit harder than any rejection. She'd built a narrative around me long before Lennon ever showed up. The night they sent my daughter home hungry, it wasn't a mistake. It was tradition. I looked around the quiet kitchen, the same place Lennon had cried hours before, and it felt like standing in a museum of my own endurance. I opened my laptop and began scrolling through years of transactions, documenting every payment, every expense tied to that house. A timeline of loyalty mistaken for weakness. I attached the old emails to the folder. Evidence, not memories. Outside, snow kept falling in soft gray sheets. I thought of Lennon, of how she'd looked at me last night, hurt but still kind, still polite. She didn't inherit their cruelty. She got my quiet. For once, I decided that silence would serve me, not as surrender, but as strategy. I closed the laptop, slid the files back into the envelope, and whispered, no arguments, no explanations. Tomorrow is step 1. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was standing in my backyard, breath ghosting in the cold, when my phone buzzed. Sienna's name flashed across the screen. I already knew what the call would be, about the same soft tone she used whenever she needed something. Hey, big brother. She started stretching the words like taffy. You know that STEM camp Nova got into? It's this incredible opportunity, $1, $200, but totally worth it. I figured you of all people would understand. You value education. Her voice was sweet, rehearsed. She said education like it was a key meant to unlock my wallet. I'm glad she got in, I said, but I can't help with that. I'm already covering the house, the utilities, and Mom and Dad's insurance. You might want to check if the camp offers scholarships. The silence that followed cracked like ice. When she spoke again, the sweetness was gone. Wow, she said flatly. It must be nice having everything and still being stingy. I didn't bother replying. I just ended the call and watched the screen go dark. A week later, I drove up to Aspen Creek to drop off my mother's blood pressure medication. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its windows glowing with that same warm light that once meant home. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and pine hit me, Sienna's brand of hospitality. Mom was at the counter taping a list to the refrigerator. Planning for the dinner already, I asked. She turned startled and smiled in that tight, polite way that meant I'd interrupted her. Oh, just trying to keep things organized. So many people this year. I leaned closer to the paper. The Christmas seating chart. I scanned the names: Richard, Marjorie, Sienna, Nova, the Keller family, the Petersons from down the road, even one of Sienna's clients. But not Lennon. My chest tightened. Looks like a full house, I said carefully. Lennon's really looking forward to coming. She wants to drive herself this year. Mom's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. We'll see. You know how crowded it gets. It might be easier if she stays with you this time. I didn't say what I was thinking. That Lennon was her only granddaughter. That crowded wasn't the same as unwelcome. I just nodded, handed her the medication, and walked back to the car. That list stuck in my mind the whole drive home, the way her name was missing, the neat handwriting, the note at the bottom, special guests, the Kellers. A week later, when Lennon came home from that dinner alone, I understood. It wasn't an accident. It was payback. Sienna had found her way to get even. That night while Lennon slept, I pulled the refrigerator list from my coat pocket. I'd taken it when Mom wasn't looking. The backside wasn't blank, it was an invoice. A draft printout from Sienna's company showing catering supplies delivered to the Vale residence on December 23rd. My parents' house wasn't just a home, it was her event venue. They hadn't run out of chairs for family. They'd filled them with clients and neighbors who paid her bills. I pressed my palm over my eyes, feeling the weight of it all settle. In Lennon's jacket left on the couch, I found a small envelope. The handwriting was my mother's, to Lennon. The flap was sealed, but the paper inside was blank except for 2 words: Merry Christmas. No signature, no love, nothing else. That unfinished card felt heavier than any of the invoices. It wasn't a mistake. It was proof they'd made their choice days before. I placed both papers, the seating list and the card, into the white envelope already holding the house documents. I sealed it and set it beside me. They've shown me how they set their table, I said quietly. Now it's time I learn how to set mine. The snow outside was coming down hard. In the morning, it would cover everything, even the tracks of those who'd turned us away. Christmas morning broke without color. The sky hung low, swollen with more snow. Lennon was still asleep, her face soft in the half-light. I brewed coffee, then opened the drawer where I'd kept the envelope. Inside were the deeds, the receipts, the invoices, the Christmas card, and the new document I'd drafted at dawn, a formal notice of termination of financial support and eviction within 60 days. I called Jonah, my colleague and closest friend. He didn't ask questions when I said I need a ride to Aspen Creek. We drove in silence, windshield wipers thudding a steady rhythm against the storm. The road curved through pine forests heavy with snow, and I tried not to think about the last time I'd made this drive. Lennon singing carols in the passenger seat, her voice too bright for a family that never sang back. When we reached the house, everything was quiet. No decorations outside, no lights except a flicker from the living room. I walked to the porch and knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. I crouched, slipped the envelope into the crack of the doorframe, and stood there for a moment. The cold bit through my gloves. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. As I stepped off the porch, the screen door creaked open behind me. I turned just enough to see my mother, Marjorie, in her robe, her hair undone, her face pale. She bent down, picked up the envelope, opened it right there. Her lips moved as her eyes scanned the pages. Then came the scream. "Richard! He's throwing us out!" I froze, watching from the car. My father appeared at the doorway, confusion melting into anger. Behind him, Sienna stumbled out in red Christmas pajamas, phone already in hand, camera pointed straight at me. There she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "See proof. He's lost it." I didn't say a word. Jonah reached across and turned the key in the ignition. We drove off while their voices echoed in the snow, growing smaller and smaller until all that was left was the hiss of the tires against the ice. By the time we reached Boulder, my phone was vibrating non-stop, calls, texts, notifications piling in. 36 missed calls. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. "Your mother's having a breakdown. What did you do? You can't just throw family away." Someone had sent Sienna's video to the entire family group chat. The caption read, "He's evicting our parents on Christmas Day." I opened the video. It showed my mother crying, holding the papers, Sienna narrating like a reporter. And in the background, blurred by snow, my face turned toward the car, unreadable. Scrolling through the comments, I saw one line that stopped me cold. "He's forgotten where he came from." I set the phone down. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the soft tick of the heater and the hum of the fridge. Lennon was still asleep in her room. The world, at least in our small apartment, was quiet again. Then another notification lit the screen, a tag on social media. Sienna had posted the video publicly. The caption now included my address. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about humiliation. I walked to the window, looking out at the snow falling on the empty street. Every light in every window reminded me of a table somewhere full of warmth, full of people who believed they were right. Not one of them had asked about Lennon. Not one had said her name. They cared about reputation, not kindness. About being right, not decent. I went back to the kitchen, poured a cup of tea, and sat in the same chair I'd occupied the night before. I opened the video again and paused it on my mother's face, the split second before she started shouting, the disbelief in her eyes turning into fury. "If they want me to be the villain," I said quietly, "then I'll show them what truth looks like when it's signed and sealed." I muted the phone, leaned back in the chair, and let the silence settle. The snow kept falling soft and steady, covering everything, including whatever love might have once lived in that house. 3 days after Christmas, I heard the doorbell just after sunrise. The world outside was drowned in fog, pale and soundless. When I opened the door, my mother stood there wrapped in a pink fur coat, her breath turning to mist. In her hand was the crumpled envelope I'd left on her doorstep. "Can I come in?" she asked, though she was already stepping over the threshold. She dropped the envelope on the table like a weapon and said, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you thank us." I stayed quiet for a second, steadying my voice. "You mean the house I bought, the bills I paid, or the part where you let your granddaughter eat cold bread alone on Christmas Eve?" She froze just for a moment, then let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Don't be dramatic, Orion. There were 28 people. We simply couldn't add another chair. There wasn't any room." "There was room," I said quietly. "You just didn't want her in it." Her eyes hardened. "You always twist things. You've always been so sensitive. We raised you better than this." "You raised me to stay silent," I replied. She sighed as if I were a nuisance. Then slowly she reached for the envelope, tore it down the middle, and let the pieces fall like snowflakes onto the hardwood floor. "Fine. There. Problem solved," she said. "Now you'll transfer $1,200 for Nova's science camp, and we can all forgive each other and move on." There was no anger in her tone, just certainty she truly believed I would obey. The familiarity of it almost made me laugh. I looked at her and said, "There's nothing left to forgive, Mother. Only lessons to learn." She blinked as if she didn't understand the words, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced back over her shoulder and said coldly, "You'll regret this." "Sienna's already talking to a lawyer." I didn't answer. I just stood there watching her pink coat disappear into the fog. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sienna. "Don't forget the house carries the family name. Everything you do, We'll come back to you." I didn't respond. By noon, I received an email alert. A new utility account had been opened under my name, one I hadn't authorized. Attached was a signature that looked almost like mine, but not quite. I recognized the formatting. It was from one of Sienna's event contracts. She'd copied my digital signature, using it to fake consent for additional loans connected to the Aspen Creek property. When I showed it to Jonah, he exhaled heavily. "They're setting you up," he said. "You need help. That's not personal." He scribbled a number on a scrap of paper and handed it to me. Elaine Rhodes. Attorney. She doesn't play around. That night I sat in the on-call room at the hospital watching the monitors flash in quiet rhythm. Across the room, a patient was waking from anesthesia, heart rate steady. I envied that machine, its clarity lines that rose and fell with no confusion. I thought of my mother standing in her coat tearing paper like it could undo reality. And I heard Jonah's voice again. "You need someone who knows how to fight back." I looked down at my hands, the same ones that stitched people back together every night, and murmured, "If kindness gets trampled, then law will have to speak for it." The next morning I called the number. Elaine Rhodes's office sat on the 3rd floor of a red brick building in downtown Boulder. When I arrived, she was already standing by the window, a sharp woman in her 40s with silver hair pulled tight and eyes that looked like they'd seen every form of manipulation. "Mr. Vale," she said, shaking my hand. "Jonah told me you'd come. Let's see what you've got." I handed her the folder, house deed, bank statements, the Christmas seating chart, the old email where my mother called me unstable, and finally Sienna's video of my mother screaming in the snow. She read everything page by page, no interruptions. After a long silence, she said, "You have more than enough. If they keep harassing you, we'll not only proceed with the eviction but also consider a defamation case. You've been enabling them for years. It's time to stop bleeding." Her words were clinical, like a diagnosis I already knew but needed someone else to confirm. We spent 2 hours drafting formal filings. When she placed the documents in front of me for signature, I hesitated only once. Then I signed my name cleanly. She looked at the page, nodded, and said, "They'll be served within the week." By the time I got home, the sun was gone. My phone was full of messages. I didn't need to open them to know what had happened. Sienna had already weaponized the story. The family group chat exploded with screenshots, my photo taken from a hospital hallway camera, pen in hand, signing documents. The caption she'd written underneath said, "He did it the same day a patient died under his care." Dozens of replies flooded in. "How could you? Your poor mother. She gave you life, and you throw her out." That evening, Lennon sat at the dining table scrolling on her phone, her face pale in the blue light. "There's a post about you," she said quietly. "It's everywhere." I looked over her shoulder. A forum headline read, "Doctor evicts his parents for money." The comment section burned with moral outrage from strangers who didn't know a thing about us. Lennon didn't cry. She just closed her phone and folded the Christmas card my mother had never given her, tucking it into her notebook like a relic. "They don't need proof," she said softly. "They just need someone to blame." I wanted to tell her it would pass, but even I didn't believe that. The next morning, Elaine called. Sienna's lawyer filed a motion to pause the eviction, she said. Their claim: "You're mentally unstable and unfit to make financial decisions." I laughed, once the kind of sound that doesn't hold humor. Of course she did. Elaine continued, "They've included references to your medical records. Apparently you received treatment for insomnia after your wife passed. They're framing that as evidence of instability." I sat back in my chair. "So my grief is now a legal weapon. Only if you let it be," Elaine replied. "Do you have anything that shows their financial dependence on you?" "I have everything," I said. 7 years of it. Later that afternoon, Jonah stopped by my office holding a USB drive. "You'll want this," he said. "Remember that call when Sienna begged for money last year? I record all business-related calls for insurance purposes. You might find this helpful." I listened to the recording after he left. Sienna's voice filled the room, syrupy and cold. "You're the only one with real money, Orion. You're basically the family's wallet. Be useful for once. I closed my eyes. There it was. Proof not just of greed, but contempt. When I sent it to Elaine, she called within minutes. That's it, she said. This will cut through every lie they spin. We'll take it to court. That night, I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, snowflakes blurring the edges of streetlights. On the radio, Silent Night played faintly a melody too calm for the storm that had taken root inside me. I parked on a bridge overlooking the frozen creek engine running and stared at the dark water below. My reflection in the glass looked like someone else, someone who had spent his whole life apologizing for being right. For years, I'd mistaken endurance for peace. Now I knew the difference. Silence keeps the night calm, I said to myself. But silence too long becomes its own kind of sin. When I got home, Lennon was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled to her chin. I turned off the light, sat beside her for a while, and let the house settle around us. The storm outside was easing, but the war inside our family had only begun. The courthouse in Larimer County was smaller than I imagined. Pale light glass doors streaked with frost, a quiet hum of heaters fighting against the snow. The hearing began at 9 sharp. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Elaine, my lawyer, while my mother, father, and Sienna took their seats across the aisle. Sienna's young attorney looked nervous, clutching a tablet and avoiding eye contact. The judge entered, gray-haired and calm, and the bailiff called for order. This is the case of Vale versus Vale, the clerk read. Eviction and counterclaim regarding financial mismanagement. Sienna's lawyer stood first, voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, my clients wish to state that Mr. Vale has demonstrated erratic behavior, emotional instability, and abuse of financial control. This action is not about money, it's about protecting aging parents from a son who has lost his way. My mother nodded vigorously, eyes glistening with well-rehearsed sorrow. Elaine rose slowly. Her voice when she spoke cut through the air like a clean blade. Let's talk about protection then. My client has paid every bill, mortgage, and insurance premium tied to that house for 7 years. He is the sole legal owner. His parents live there at his expense. And yet when he and his minor daughter were excluded from the family's Christmas gathering, where 28 others, including neighbors and business clients, were in attendance, he made a lawful decision to end the arrangement. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have proof of payment. Elaine placed a thick folder on the bench. Mortgage receipts, bank transfers, utility bills, and medical coverage statements. All under his name. Sienna's lawyer objected. Irrelevant to the judge, lifted a hand. Overruled. Continue. Then Elaine pressed a button on her laptop. The courtroom speakers filled with Sienna's recorded voice. You're the only one with real money, Orion. You're basically the family's wallet. Be useful for once. Silence swept through the room. Even the clicking of pens stopped. Sienna lowered her head. My mother went pale. My father just stared at the table, jaw locked tight. Elaine let the recording finish, then said, Your Honor, this isn't a man who abandoned his family. This is a man who refused to keep being exploited by it. The judge turned to me. Dr. Vale, do you wish to add anything? I stood, my palms pressed against the table. They said there was no room for my daughter at Christmas dinner. No room at the table of her own blood. There were 28 chairs that night, and somehow not one for her. I made my choice because I won't let her sit outside the window of her own family ever again. My mother suddenly stood up, voice breaking. That was a misunderstanding. She could have stayed if she'd asked. The judge's gavel came down once sharp. Mrs. Vale, you'll sit down. Elaine handed the judge one last paper, the seating chart with my mother's handwriting, every guest listed but not Lennon. On the back, the invoice for Sienna's event dated the night before Christmas. The judge examined it quietly, then looked over his glasses. The court finds the eviction order valid. The property title is in the name of Mr. Orion Vale. The opposition provides no legal standing. A murmur filled the room. My mother's hand gripped the edge of the table. Sienna avoided my gaze. When the session ended, I gathered my papers. As we stepped into the hall, my mother brushed past, whispering, You'll regret this. Maybe I said. But today the truth had its seat at the table. Outside, snow drifted across the courthouse steps. Lennon waited near the door, coat-zipped eyes searching mine. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now." I put my hand on her shoulder. "Let's go home." But the quiet didn't last long. By evening, my phone buzzed endlessly. Lennon's classmates had found the courtroom footage. Someone had leaked the clip of my mother shouting. They mocked her voice, then mocked Lennon for sharing my name. Then came an email from my father. "You did the right thing, but don't come back. Your mother won't forgive you." A message request followed from a local reporter. "We'd like to interview you about the case. The story's gaining traction." I turned to Lennon, who was reading the same news on her phone. She looked up calm, but steady. "If they're lying," she said, "then let the world hear the truth." I nodded. Snow tapped softly against the window. "We will," I told her. We already started. When we stepped outside that night, the sky was white as paper. Lennon looked up at it and whispered, "So what now, Dad?" I smiled faintly. "Now," I said, "we live by what we defended." 2 years passed before the house finally felt like peace again. Boulder's summer air shimmered with warmth, and the cherry trees in our yard bent low under clusters of pink blossoms. Lennon was 18 now, packing for college in Seattle. She'd chosen psychology to understand why people hurt the ones they love, she said with a wry smile. I still worked nights at the ER sometimes, teaching residents on my days off. Life had quieted into something steady. The Aspen Creek house had long been sold. The young couple who bought it sent me a postcard last spring. "We planted cherry trees along the old fence. Thank you for giving us a start." I pinned it on the fridge right beside Lennon's acceptance letter. My parents now rented a small home near Fort Collins, living mostly off retirement savings. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox, the handwriting unmistakable, my father's shaky but deliberate. Orion. It began. "We all lost something in this fight, but at least Lennon won. That has to count for something." There was no apology, just an admission wrapped in quiet resignation. Inside the same envelope, a folded newspaper clipping. My mother had added it, no signature, just her perfume faintly lingering on the paper. The headline read, "No room for cruelty at my table." An old interview I'd given months after the trial. She hadn't written to me, but she'd kept the article. That was her way of speaking without surrendering. That evening, the sky blushed gold. Lennon was setting the table on the porch, 2 plates, 2 glasses of lemonade. I stepped out and she said I added a 3rd chair, just in case someone ever wants to join us. Her voice was light, but the meaning landed deep. I looked at the empty chair, then at her. "As long as they know what it means to deserve it," I said. She smiled. "Then it'll always be waiting." My phone rang just then. Sienna's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her face appeared older somehow, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I thought standing with Mom was the only way to be loved. I was wrong. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't." She gave a small nod and ended the call before silence could turn awkward. When I turned back, Lennon was watching the horizon, sunlight catching her hair. The cherry blossoms swayed in the warm breeze. My phone rang again. Elaine. "Congratulations," she said. "The final transfer's complete. You're free and clear, legally and financially. It's done." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. After the call, I joined Lennon at the table. She looked at the 3rd chair again and said softly, "Now the table's finally full, right, Dad?" I looked out across the garden, petals drifting like snow in the amber light. "It's full," I said, "and it always will be for those who've earned their place." She raised her glass and I raised mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The evening air carried the faint scent of cherry blossoms and distant laughter from another yard. 2 years ago, there had been no room. Now every chair was a choice. I thought of that night in the ER, of the cold bread and half an orange, of the girl who came home ashamed but still kind. Everything after that had been about giving her back what they took away, a seat at the table, a place that was hers. If anyone asked me now whether I regretted what I did, I'd tell them this: I only regret the years I stayed silent. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is draw the line where kindness ends and dignity begins. Sometimes family doesn't break you with loud words, it breaks you with silence, with the empty chair you weren't offered. But healing begins the moment you decide to build your own table, even if it only seats two at first. I've learned that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're proof that your kindness finally learned to stand up. If this story moved something in you, take a second to breathe, to think of who in your life deserves a seat at your table. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, whether it's raining outside your window or quiet where you are. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this. And if stories like this remind you that standing your ground can still come from love, please subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing them, one truth, one heart at a time.